Dwi'n cefnogi y brotest oherwydd dwi'n teimlo'n frwd iawn iawn dros yr achos ac yn erbyn y toriadau. This is about money and it's about cuts, but it's about much more than that. It's about money. We understand the pressures that the Senedd is under and the government is under. We understand what the Westminster government is trying to do. It's got a scorched earth policy when it comes to public spending. So we understand all that. We understand the pressures on the health service and the need to support the health service when it's in such dire straits. But that does not mean that the government has to decimate the culture sector, arts, culture, and in today's context, heritage. It doesn't mean that the government has to do this. These cuts, I believe, are savage cuts, especially for institutions that are trying to cope at the moment with the effects of runaway inflation and historic underfunding. I'll come back to that later. The immediate and inevitable result of these cuts is, of course, on jobs, your jobs. If I'm right, about 150 jobs across the three institutions represented here, the library, the museum, and the Royal Commission, with maybe more to come in future, who knows. I'm told that a third of jobs in the National Library will go eventually. That's a horrendous number. These are horrendous numbers if you consider that our institutions in UK terms are small institutions. They're not big institutions. So the immediate results, what are they? Loss of expertise, loss of knowledge. Very often that expertise, that knowledge is rare and sometimes it's unique. That means it won't be replaced. It won't be replaced easily. Secondly, it means loss of service to all the many, many groups of people who depend on our institutions. Old and young, people from every sector, they're going to lose your service and they won't have any other source for finding that service. And thirdly, I think we're now in danger of losing the essential, the absolute essential functions of each of the three institutions. The things which our charters, our royal charters, were set up for us to do. Really, really basic things like collecting and conserving. Those things are now under threat. Now, I mentioned underfunding. These cuts come on top of historic underfunding over many, many years. I began work just before the millennium, and I can't think that in any of the 15 years I was in the National Library, we had very many years with a real terms increase in funding from the government. It was nearly always a question of cuts and trying to make do. So these cuts come on top of cuts and cuts and cuts in previous years, which has weakened every one of the institutions represented here. For me, that's one of the big disappointments of devolution, that the government hasn't been able to look after us. What about the long-term results? There are two, I think. One is a loss of access to our history. It's very simple. But not just the history of the past. It's also the history of the present and of the future. The way that the people behind us in that building, the members of the Senedd, are going to be remembered themselves personally is through us. It's bodies like the Welsh Political Archive, which will give them any sort of immortality. If that institution, the Welsh Political Archive, if all of our institutions are no longer operating properly, nobody's going to remember them. Secondly, equally obviously, we're going to lose a key part of our own history and identity as people who live in Wales. Annes Glyn wrote, I think, a superb englyn about the National Library, in fact, and I'm going to read it to you because it encapsulates everything that I mean by a loss of identity. Gwn fod trysor rhwng cloriau, ond mae hon yn fyd mwy na'i geiriau. Ymddihi cawn i'n bwyhau, hi yw un rhyddid a'n gwreiddiau. That seems to me to say everything about what is important to us and what's now under threat. It doesn't need to be like this. We don't need to follow the dismal example of England. Think of Birmingham, with a population about the same size as Wales. Birmingham has just lost all its public funding for the arts and culture, every penny. We don't need to be like England. Why don't we be like Scotland? The Scottish Government has decided to increase funding on the arts and culture and heritage by £100 million by the year 2028, starting with an extra 15.8 million in the year to come. They can see the point. They see why arts, culture, heritage matter. They can see that it matters from the point of view of our social and cultural and economic development. These things matter. The Scots see it. So do the Irish. They've been supporting their culture, they've been supporting their heritage well for several years now. And look how it's paid off. Look how important Irish culture is seen all over the world, and it gets stronger and stronger. Is Wales going to follow Scotland and Ireland, or is it going to follow the dismal example of England? It doesn't have to be like this. Cultural spending is a tiny, infinitesimally tiny part of the budget which the Welsh Government has. It makes no sense whatsoever to cut our budget when the money saved is hardly going to make any difference to, for example, the budget of the National Health Service in Wales. Why cut it? It doesn't have to be like this. So I've got two questions for the members of the Senedd behind you. The first question is this: do you really know what you're doing in ordering such huge cuts in our budgets? Our predecessors, in the case of every single one of the institutions here, our predecessors took over 100 years to build up these institutions to what they are today, or what they have been until recently. They should have been proud of what they did. We should be proud of what they did. Everybody in Wales should be proud of what they did. But it only takes a few years to undo all that work, to undo all that painstaking and committed work, and to bring all these institutions to their knees. Sometimes people say, in fact the government says, it doesn't matter because they can find other sources of funding. What do you think you've been doing over all these years except trying to find extra sources of funding? In the end, the truth is, none of these institutions can fulfil their objectives without adequate funding from the Welsh Government. The second question I've got for the government is this: will you not think again at this very late stage about the budget? Will you not change your mind will you not talk to the institutions, talk to the unions, and fund the museum, the library, the Royal Commission adequately?
Yes!
And serve the people of Wales properly. If the Welsh Government can't do this, what is the point of a Welsh Government? One that it can't be trusted to look after its own culture and its own heritage. And finally, just a word to you. I'm a has-been, and I have been for a long time. You're not. So please, keep on talking, keep on arguing, keep on putting the case, and keep on fighting. Diolch yn fawr iawn.